We're on the last module of designing an Azure data solution, so let's have a look at designing for efficiency in operations.
Absolutely. So in this final module, basically, what we're looking at is maximizing the efficiency of your cloud spend, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the reason you're moving to Azure is to make use of resources as efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
Which means that, you know, you shouldn't really be in a position where you're over provisioning anymore, okay?
And that goes to optimal efficiency of resources and services.
And you can use monitoring and analytics to gain operational insights to see if you're being optimal with your spend, which is the second lesson. And then finally, we'll look at using automation to reduce your effort and errors, okay?
Okay.
So when it comes to maximizing cloud spend, first of all, it's an acknowledgement that, you know, there's a different way that you will deal with your spend on premises versus the cloud, right? And within Azure, you're able to track that first and foremostly. So it becomes more of an operational expense rather than a capital expense. So you might want to think of ways that you might want to organize that. So maybe there's special departments within an organization that consume more resources than other, so you want to track that billing, right? We also cover in the module how you can optimize infrastructure as a service cost. So an example of that would be making sure that you right size a SQL Server virtual machine with the resources that it needs, but you don't over provision it, that you're spending money, well, you're wasting money basically by over provisioning. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, some of that goes into that cost of goods motion where you think about a retailer that has to deal with things like holiday period sales and so on, where you look, well, we're going to need more resources and scale out their compute to be able to process all these transactions that come through the funnel, all this campaign optimization and so on. And so what they're really looking at is like, hey, what is the balance between our cost of goods doing operations and then the revenue stream that gets put against that?
That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and there's really, I know some customers that really look at that closely, is like, well, if we are seeing this amount of sales transactions going up significantly, we can actually throttle and bring up our operational efficiency, add more compute, because we're still making a higher profit than we're dealing with lower compute resources.
No, that's a really fair point, because optimization isn't a one-time thing, right? And it could be like seasonal, like in the wine industry or like in retail. And yeah, you want to, of course, make sure that you can optimize both your IaaS and also your PaaS. Yeah, so you might want to optimize your SQL database, your SQL data warehouse, your Cosmos DB, and use the right pricing model that matches what you need. So really, the first lesson in this particular module is about efficiency and using Azure to meet your needs in a cost-effective way.
Before we go to the next slide, let's talk about this for a minute, right? Because the moment you see costs and storage costs and pricing models, too many times people start thinking like, wow, this is totally irrelevant for me. Because they're going to expect and say like, wow, do I need to go study pricing tiers and so on if I'm preparing for certification? Let's be clear on that. The answer is no, you shouldn't. Okay?
Yeah,
we're
absolutely
really looking at this module from how do you optimally design for cloud? How do you optimally design for these services? You're going to look at storage optimization and so on. But we don't expect you to know things like service tiers and costs associated with the design that you've put together.
Of course not. And the reality of the situation is, in your classroom, there are going to be some people there who are doing the exam, but there's going to be a lot of people there who are doing it to learn. So this is really a topic that's really about people learning something. Rather
and we need to put skilling prior to skilling assessments,
Exactly.
which is what certification is.
So with that, we've got monitoring and analytics to gain operational insights, right? So it's about the notion of collecting and analysing data to determine performance, health, and availability of your applications, your databases. So you've got your core monitoring, right? So you're basically looking at the fundamentals here, right? And you get 4 core monitoring areas: activity logging, health of cloud services, metrics and diagnosis, and then there's our recommendations of best practices. Now, that core monitoring is really kind of giving you that broad baseline of how the operations are going on in the cloud. But occasionally, you might want to go a little bit deeper, particularly for deep infrastructure monitoring. So for IaaS workloads in particular, like with SQL Server on virtual machines, you might want to just make sure that you're analysing free disk space, memory utilisation, CPU. Why? Well, firstly, from a performance perspective, but secondly, going back to the previous lesson about, well, are we utilising it efficiently as well? And then, of course, you've got deep application monitoring with application insights. So you're seeing the behaviour of your applications, how they're interacting with the various data platforms within Azure, so you can better detect and diagnose issues as they occur.
Okay.
Yeah. Finally, automation. Yeah. So managing the infrastructure of any type of workload in an efficient and automated way, right? It may be labour intensive in the first instance, but you're trying to get to a point that it's not labour intensive moving forward. So a big thing here is what's referred to as infrastructure as code, right? Where we can basically use the management of past services, infrastructures, virtual machines, basically in a script file. Yeah, so that way what you're doing is rather than installing and configuring, you're provisioning through a script.
Yep. And when you think about that Azure automation and you think about the ability to use webhooks into applications as well, the capabilities you have at Azure Functions, I mean, you look at these automation of these operational tasks.
Yeah.
Azure is such a rich platform with the capabilities that it brings
to
really drive that optimization of resources forward, right? Like an example of that would be like, hey, we're hitting a performance bottleneck. Well, that could be triggered and automatically take corrective action. And I think that kind of automation is really where we should be thinking about when we're designing cloud solutions.
Absolutely, and we do cover as well the different kinds of infrastructure as code that can help you there. So you've got the imperative and the declarative. So with the declarative, you've got the JSON formats where you're calling ARM templates, or with basically the imperative, you're basically using Cloud Shell and you're actually calling out what you're doing through PowerShell there. But it's not just provisioning services and that. You've also got operational tasks, which is you're loading to there, where if there is a problem, then there's a bit of code that can run through Azure automation that can manage operational tasks such as managing schedules, managing credentials, certificates, and so forth. And that's the second point, right?
What are we doing in the lab on this?
The lab is designing for efficiency and operations. What we're doing here is looking at the 3 lessons that we just looked at, maximizing the efficiency of the cloud environment, using monitoring and analytics again, insights, and use automation to reduce effort and error. Now, basically what you're doing is this scenario drills a little bit down into the case study that we have, where this time the chief financial officer is getting involved because she's a little bit concerned that she doesn't want the costs to spiral out of control.
Sounds familiar.
Comes very close to someone I know in my life, with my dad being an accountant. So basically, in this scenario, she wants assurances that basically your department have got a handle on it, right? And that they're supporting the services as efficiently as possible, and what steps have been taken to provide evidence on how the environment is being used. Which I think for a CFO, that's a fair request to make, right? In addition, your chief information officer wants to get an understanding of how the team can monitor the systems and work efficiently through automation, and they want an overview of what can be done to reduce the administrative effort. This is possibly the first time where we move away from design and start to think a little bit more about operations. Yeah. So from this, basically, you may pick up the fact, and this is pulled out in the instructor notes, that there is actually a pricing calculator that could be helpful to the CIO to try and help with forecasting what the costs may be. In exercise 2, see if there's any debates with regards to the monitoring technologies that may have been chosen by the different groups. And then for exercise 3, when you think about the CIO wanting, coverage of what you're going to do, once you've understood what the groups have given you, are there any additional tasks that you think a data engineer should perform to support that, right? And then basically that kind of wraps up, this course actually, where you've gone from the design aspect, thinking about the operation, and you've got that holistic view of everything as one. So you go through the module summary, covering what you've just covered, making sure that the students understand it. And after the course, we've put a link there to a video that introduces them to DevOps, because as we mentioned, you're talking about the operational side here of dealing with it, and DevOps is part of that, and you'll be part of that as well as a data engineer. And that basically wraps up this module.
Okay, and yeah, so with that, we're actually also wrapping up the DP-201 Designing an Azure Data Solution course.
Yeah.
Really, we hope that this was extremely useful to you as a trainer preparing to go deliver and train on this. If there's any follow-up questions that you guys have, we gladly address that in the town hall calls that are being set up as well. Definitely always open for feedback. Chris, I want to thank you for walking me through the data engineering aspect of the curriculum that you have.
Welcome.
We'll also work with the rest of the team to look at data engineering and how that integrates with the AI engineering curriculum as well as our data science. So we'll have some more upcoming videos around that as well.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.